The government's Department of Homeland Security is buying up loads of ammo. At the same time, they're restricting civilians' rights to own and purchase firearms. Can you put two and two together? Infidel Body Armor can stop every round, including hollow points and .308 sniper rounds, is reasonably priced and fully legal. But for how long? Go to InfidelBodyArmor.com, spelled INFIDEL bodyarmor.com. Infidel Body Armor. Just won't quit.
All right, I got Jim Sierri on the line with me. He's got over 40 years of experience in the industry. He is a trainer for FEMA's Community Emergency Response Team, which is CERT. He's also a disaster instructor for the American Red Cross. He's a American Heart Association CPR and basic first aid instructor. He's also the owner of GetReadyGear.com, and he just published a new book called Middle Ground Prepping. Jim, you there?
I am. Good morning, Vince.
Good morning. So yeah, you're a CERT team instructor. I'm a CERT team member as well. I did it in Long Island, but then when I moved upstate, I got to find a local one around here. But that's a pretty cool program.
It is. We, my wife and I were actually trained as trainers about 8 or 9 years ago now, and we've been providing training to one of the local CERT teams. We've done over 15 classes with them at this point, trained close to 400 people in the CERT program, and it's a great program. People come in fairly naive about how to handle disasters. And by the time we're done with them in 8 weeks, they have a new appreciation for a few things like preparedness and situational awareness.
Yeah. Now, FEMA also has online courses that you can take if you want to take it even further. I started doing some of the radiological emergency preparedness certificate. I've got the pandemic influenza, military equipment use in a disaster. I've got quite a few of them now under my belt, but you can do it for free online. And I think the second part of it, they'll actually fly you out to some of these training facilities, one of them in, I think, Nevada. The second part, they actually put you in nuclear biochem gear, and they teach you how to use a Geiger counter and all that stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, I got my training back in the nuclear power industry, actually. Back in the early 80s, we were working for a firm that built nuclear plants all across the country. And as a welding engineer, I'd travel to them putting out fires all the time. But, yeah, I got a lot of training there in terms of safety with rad protection and wearing SCBAs, confined space entry requirements. So it was good background for me, ultimately. It was great.
Sure. You know who I just had on my show the other night? Dave Jones. He's a nuclear, chemical, biological weapons expert, and he's got like top secret clearance. He's been doing it for like 40 years. No, 25 years. I'm sorry. He's only 50, but he's been doing it a long time.
Interesting.
And that was a really good show last night. So you want to tell me a little bit more about your history and your bio?
Sure. You know, I've got my engineering degree many years ago, and then about half as many years ago got my master's finally, and wound up doing a lot of engineering consulting. That kind of morphed into some other consulting companies that did training, which taught me a lot about adult learning and how to teach adults, which has served me well through the CERT program and the CPR first aid classes that we do. Ultimately, pretty much just got tired of flying around the country and wanted to do something different. At the time, my wife and I were heavily involved in search and rescue activities up here in Northern California with a couple of sheriff's departments. And we're getting very accustomed to the emergency response system up here. And just you finally realize that how many people that will do a regular activity like a day hike with absolutely no planning and then find themselves lost or even worse. as a result of getting separated from their group or having an accident while they're out in the woods. And most people just don't anticipate that, which is unfortunate. So it got me to thinking if there's a way we could maybe help people kind of prepare for the unexpected a little more, which is our tagline here at Get Ready Gear. We don't really pitch the doom and gloom. I, for one, do not want to survive Armageddon. I don't want to be the last one standing, but I do want to make sure I survive a lot of the local natural disasters and things that could occur around our neighborhood. So because of that, we actually started Get Ready Gear 10 years ago now, and have been providing emergency supplies and kits to schools, businesses, government offices, and families across the country. So it's been rewarding in that fact, and this book is just kind of a culmination of things that we've learned in the last 10 years, and wanted to get that out to people and help them understand better how to get prepared.
Nice. So when did the book come out?
We actually launched it on, I believe it was Tuesday, the 2nd, and it is on Amazon, and it's currently one of the free ebooks back through today. The free promotion ends tonight at midnight, but at this point we've downloaded over close to 3,000 copies at this point, and we're currently rated number 1 on Amazon for the nonfiction disaster relief book category, which is fantastic for a brand new launch. So we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah, I'm on your website right now, getreadygear.com, and it's a pretty cool site. I like it. It's nice and clean. You got a bunch of survival kits and water purification, shelter, lighting, safety product. You sell CERT gear, and then your book is here. It's right there, right now on the first page. Middle Ground Prepping, A Sensible Approach.
Yeah, it's
cool.
We, like I said, we've kind of morphed the site. This is actually probably our 4th generation website. This one is actually a completely customized website just for us now to handle our shipping requirements and our product requirements. So thanks to the good help of the folks at SG Design Studios, we've actually been able to put this together over the last year. And we're pretty proud of it at this point. So, yeah, it's great to be there. We have lots of different stuff. There's also lots of reference information on here. In addition to selling products, obviously, we have a lot of content on the website where people can get more information about local disasters and how to prepare for emergencies.
Yeah. Do you find people are getting more into prepping and preparedness?
Well, I think there's a larger emphasis on it nowadays, and again, probably because of the TV show Doomsday Preppers, which kind of also prompted me to write this particular book. It's a fantastic program, the top rating show for the network it was on for many years. But the problem that I had with the program was, and unfortunately with reality TV, you got to keep doing it bigger and better every time. And the problem with that is you start looking at people who are prepping, and they live in a rural area. They've got 100 acres. They go build a pond. They build an underground bunker. They've got exterior security provisions out there. They've got underground food storage capability. All good stuff, but it doesn't translate very well into the urban society and the other 99% of the people who don't have the room and the capability to do all that stuff. And what I was hoping to do with this book was let people know that that's not the normal. That's kind of an extreme type of prep. And, God bless those who do it, but not everybody can. I didn't want people to not prepare because they thought it was going to be too big of a deal.
Yeah, a lot of people, they don't get into it because they either feel it's going to cost them too much money, or it's just too much information for them to sift through. But that's why they should read your book, because you've got a lot of experience, and you can help people sift through all the information that's out there and make it a little easier for them to understand.
Exactly. Trying to just to let them know that doing a little bit of stuff is going to help you significantly. You don't need 10 different bug-out vehicles that are custom built to drive over other cars down the freeway trying to get out of town. You're much better off listening to your emergency alert system on a radio, and when they call for the voluntary evacuations in your neighborhood, get out. If you get out when they first tell you to, you've got a good chance of getting out of the area. When you wait, like folks have done down in Galveston for years, and they start heading back up to Houston, and pretty soon the freeway's jammed up. Everybody's run out of gas, cars are stalled, and nobody's going anywhere. So now instead of evacuating the danger or the hurricane that's coming, you're actually sitting in your car on the freeway when the hurricane comes. So not a good place to be.
And a lot of people don't even listen to the evacuation orders. Like there's either bug out or bug in, and some of these people, they don't want to listen. They just want to stay with their property and stuff, and sometimes it can be really dangerous.
That, the desire not to, especially with the wildfires, which we've had out here in California, terrible summer. One of the firefighters I work with, they've kind of dubbed it the 2015 Inferno here in California. But certainly you don't want to leave your home thinking that maybe just putting the garden hose on the roof will help. But at the same time, you got to think about your personal safety. And a lot of times when they're interviewing people on the TV after they've lost their home, they'll all say, "Well, we only lost stuff, but we have our lives," that's the focus. And that's why the law enforcement and the fire agencies want you to evacuate, is to save your life, essentially. Firefighters save lives first, and then they save property. So.
Yeah. We had a big flood over where I live 2 months ago, and they were going door to door asking us to evacuate. But thank God the flood didn't hit us, but some of my neighbors' houses were destroyed. And as far as the wildfires, they've been terrible. I had a smoke jumper from Idaho on the other night with the National Interagency Fire Center, and that's a really crazy job. These guys, they jump out of planes into fires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a young man's game, that's for sure. But in some of these remote areas, because the terrain is just so steep and you can't get vehicles to them, helicopters have trouble working in some of those steep canyons when the fire creates updrafts and air temperature differences. The only way to get in is jumping through an airplane. Boy, that's a tough way to make a living, but you're glad they're out there.
Yeah. So what else you talk about in your book? What's the main, and why did you name it Middle Ground Prepping?
Well, the concept of middle ground kind of came from the fact that on one hand, everybody has this notion of the doomsday preppers that are doing extreme and sometimes fanatical preps for what may be fairly low probability disasters. For example, pole shifts. People are concerned about the poles shifting, and there is a slight probability that something like that could occur, but it's very, very low. And from a hazard assessment standpoint, just like your cities, counties, and states are going to do, they're evaluating the risk potential of anything when they do their emergency planning. So if you've got something with an extremely low probability of occurrence, you're not going to spend a tremendous amount of effort planning for that particular event. But the point I make in the book is, even if you're planning for an earthquake or a flood or a wildfire or a tornado, which covers most of the country, or even a hurricane, the preparations you do for those standard, fairly high probability occurrences will suit you well in a low probability occurrence as well. So I wouldn't focus on things like worrying about pole shifts and civil war, but any of the preparedness activities you do for some of the more local disasters would serve you well if something like that did happen. We just try not to be the focal point. On the other end of the spectrum, from the doomsday prepper crowd, you've got over 60% of the people in the United States who've done nothing to prepare. They have no emergency plans, not even for their own to get out of their own house. They have no go bags or emergency kits or any focused.
Why do you think that is?
Supplies. Well,
why do you think people aren't taking it seriously yet?
There's a couple of reasons. One, it's going to be demographics that could obviously be some of the lower income residents in the United States, because it does take a little bit of money to prepare. And if you've got a choice between getting your kids to school, driving the car, feeding the family, emergency preparedness is going to come up a little short. So that's one of the problems. The other issue, I think, is that a lot of people, and to some degree falsely, believe the government will take care of them and make them whole again. I think there's a lot of people in New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy that have realized that their lives aren't whole again because of the insurance requirements that they had and the policies and the restrictions. They're not as good as they were before the hurricane. So believing that the government's going to take care of everybody is not a good solution. And the government's always out there pitching, hey, we got FEMA out here and the Red Cross is out there doing good work. But do you really want to be in a Red Cross shelter with 10,000 other people? That's kind of the question I always pose to folks when I'm doing presentations. I don't want to be number 10,000 in line waiting for a drink of water. I want to have my own water supply before I get out of my town and evacuate. So on the one hand, you've got extreme preppers. On the other hand, you've got people who've done nothing. So I'm trying to find this middle ground, if you will, hence the title Middle Ground Prepping, a sensible approach to preparedness. And that's kind of how we named the book, Vince.
Okay. I have a name for that. I call it the Swiss Army knife approach, because there's a little bit in there for everyone. Where planning for one emergency, it can you can cover most of the stuff in all the other different scenarios.
Exactly.
Like you're always going to need water. You're always going to need something to light a fire with. You're always going to want to have extra clothes or socks, or and I think that's what you're going with right there. The average guy's approach to prepping. And some of these shows like Doomsday Preppers, like they were good because they brought a lot of focus onto prepping, and they made it mainstream. But then it also has its negatives. It made some of the people look like they were crazy, or they were too extreme. And I think preppers and survivalists should have their own channel by now. I mean, all these shows get great reviews. So I'm trying to put together a dedicated channel where it's just survival, prepping, hunting, camping, gardening. We're going to have a few shows on the network like Doomsday Preppers, but the majority of it is going to be how-to stuff, like how to garden, how to do this, how to do that. And I think it's about time. I mean, they have a channel for everything else.
Well, you look at my wife and I love the Alaska shows right now. And you've got people living off the land in Alaska, trying to make a living. People moving freight up and down the rivers in Alaska. And those shows are extremely popular. When it comes to reality shows, we like to watch the ones where people work for a living. I don't like the induced drama from the producers per se, but I do like to watch all the shows where people work hard to make a living and just to see how they do it. And Alaska is one of the extreme environments left in this country. So yeah, I think there's a place for a show like you're talking about, just dedicated to survivalists and outdoor people, because these shows are extremely popular right now.
Yeah. I got a lot of Amish that live near me, and I've been asking some of the families if I can come down for the day or the weekend and interview them and work on the farm, because in a natural disaster or any type of major catastrophe, an EMP, whatever it is, their way of life really won't be affected the way an average American's life would. And I think there's something to be learned from that. So I'm trying to set up an interview with some of the local Amish people.
Yeah, that actually works out well, because an electromagnetic pulse is not going to stop my horse. So we've actually got 2 horses that we used to use in search and rescue. They're still on property with us, and those are my bug-out vehicles. They don't need gas. They can eat any weed along the side of the road pretty much to feed them between here and there. And they'll go for days and days. But an electromagnetic pulse will not screw them up because they don't have a computer on them. So, people who have, like the Amish that have their horses and their little carriages can still move around. Everybody else with a modern car with a computer in it's going to be sitting in the garage.
Yeah. So where do you live? Are you near the cities?
We're actually in a rural community. We're just southeast of Sacramento, California. And we've been here about 6 years now on property, so we've got the horses with us, which is nice to do. They're kind of in semi-retirement. We still ride them somewhat regularly and trail ride them to keep them exposed.
Okay, so you wouldn't be bugging out. You'd probably be staying where you are, right?
We probably would if we were here, but there are we have relatives that live not too far away in several different directions. So depending on which way the wind's blowing and which evacuation routes the emergency operations tell people to go, we have several options to go to. So and that's one of the things you need to do. You've got to think now about where would you evacuate. If you don't have local relatives, if you don't have resources financially to go to a hotel out of town and stay for a couple of days, then you're probably going to be forced to stay at one of the local shelters, which is fine. But if you're at one of the shelters, you're part of the problem. If you can get this to a neighbor's house or not a neighbor, maybe a friend's or a relative that are outside the immediate impact area, then you're going to lessen the burden on first responders in terms of having to deal with you, whether you're at a shelter or if you hunker down and stayed in your place. Then they're going to be coming in with a helicopter trying to pick you off the roof or something, which is not where you want to be.
Yeah. I mentioned I heard you mention before about the freeways jamming up. Is it necessarily a good idea for people to take the freeways, or should they be looking for an alternate route when they bug out?
There's a couple lessons I teach regularly about that. Number one, whenever there's an evacuation, that's generally done by the local law enforcement unit. They're the ones that affect the evacuation. Based on information that they have through your local emergency operations center, they have determined one or two of the best routes to evacuate a given area. And they do that based on there may be accidents on major freeways. There may be power lines down across major thoroughfares. So they have information as a result of this incident that the residents don't have. So when they tell you to, evacuate your area heading east on such and such a road, they know that road is cleared, and that's where their resources are going to be in terms of watching people. If, on the other hand, you decide to take a side road somewhere, you don't know if it's going to be impacted by this local incident. And if you have a problem or an accident, there may not be anybody there looking for you. So if you do that, you've got to make sure you've got supplies with you on board in the car to handle, being stuck out there for a night or two or something before somebody can come and rescue you or fix your car. So
your bug out bag, you should always leave a bug out bag in your car, right?
Absolutely. Mine's always in the trunk of our sedan, but when we take a road trip, we move it into the back seat. So that if we're actually in an accident and pinned in the car, I can still reach it in the back seat. A lot of people don't consider that one. It's not always there, but when we do take a major road trip, we do move it into that proximity where I can get to it from the driver's compartment. But yeah, if you don't have something, we read stories all the time about people driving off the edge of the road, going down an embankment, and 4 or 5 days later, somebody stumbles upon them, and they survived because they were drinking dew off of leaves in a tree that was sticking through their windshield. So probably not the way you want to survive.
So they must have some really cool new software to deal with all these different emergencies, like real-time emergency management software that tells them all where the latest incidents are, if there's traffic building up somewhere. The whole new, I know after 9/11 they implemented a whole new emergency management system with 911 and all that. You know anything about any of that software that they use?
Well, I don't know specifically about that type. I do know that after, I believe it was after Katrina, and I think I talk about it in the book as I'm remembering, they were actually, one of the after action items was they needed a supply management software package because they just didn't know what they had and where they had it. And since then, they've had a contract out to develop such software. But as of printing of the book, it wasn't working very well. And they still had problems as a result of when they went through Hurricane Sandy as well. So, I mean, again, I've had exposure to these many times over my career. Large government software applications just are complicated. And they're difficult.
In a disaster, it doesn't matter what software you have, I guess. There's going to be problems.
I mean, obviously, they're trying. They've realized there's a need to be more effective with their planning and their resource allocations, but they're not where they need to be yet. I mean, after 9/11, that really highlighted the fact that emergency responders and across the country have a difficult time talking to each other in an emergency because of all the different radio frequencies. And nationally, they've done a great deal of work trying to improve that system so that local agencies can talk better to each other. But it still needs work as well.
Yeah. Now, the average person, what's the best thing for them as far as information? Is it a hand-cranked radio, a ham radio?
Well, for the average person, probably the easiest thing is to have some type of battery or solar power radio that does not require electricity. And if it's an AM/FM, that's great. Just gives you more channels. But you just need to be able to tune into the emergency alert system, which is a national program. You'll hear it on your radios and TVs every now and then where they do the emergency alert test and put out a tone to make sure the system's working. That's where the majority of people have traditionally gotten their emergency alert information. Today, in 2015, social media may actually be at the forefront of that information now. As soon as something happens, somebody gets on Twitter, somebody gets on Facebook, they do a post that goes to their friends send it to their friends, and it moves fairly quickly, alerting people that there's been an incident. There have been some, I know I follow one of the blogs fairly regularly, and there has been a lot of discussion now as to, can you really trust that information? It wouldn't be that difficult to propagate a Facebook hoax and say that there's an odorless gas cloud coming towards this neighborhood and everybody needs to leave. And as soon as people start seeing the cars leaving the neighborhood, the marauders come in and raid your house. And that's the fear. So the emergency alert system is a dependable means of communication that you can trust. Even though you're probably going to be getting Facebook and Twitter feeds more quickly, you just want to make sure that you're measuring that and that those are legitimate feeds and that there really is an emergency that you need to react to. So I would always verify that through the emergency alert system, Vince.
Well, that flood I was talking about before, on my smartphone, I had an alert that popped up about 45 minutes before the actual flood.
Oh, that's great. What system was that on, do you know?
And I think that was directly from the emergency system. It goes to all cell phones or anyone in the area of a potential emergency they send it to.
Yeah, we actually, the name just escapes me, but there's a national, I mentioned it in the book, but there is a national software application that you can go into and identify what county you live in. And once you identify that county, it will identify the local sheriffs, fire agencies. If there are cities in your county, it will list the city police departments that exist. And you can actually check those off based on where you live in the county, and actually get alerts from those agencies if they're posting them real time. Now, I know one of the local cities where I teach the CERT course, they have this system, and I will get alerts on my cell phone that there's an auto accident at a certain intersection and it's blocking the intersection. Or there's a house fire or a grass fire, in that area somewhere, and what areas to avoid. And those are put out pretty real time by the police or fire department, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's a great tool to have.
The name of the app escapes me right now, but I do put it in the book.
What are some of the other chapters in your book? What's the meat and potatoes?
There's a couple things we do in the book which not a lot of people
Can you
have.
go chapter by chapter real quick? Just tell.
Yeah. In Chapter 1, we call it Why We Prepare. And Chapter 1 is really a historical look, a fairly well-referenced historical look at government and personal preparedness activities in the United States. And this dates back to the late 1800s. I think when the government first got involved with helping a local community repair damage after some massive fires. So it gives you a perspective of why we used to kind of prepare, and how that's evolved into where we are today, living in 2015, which is a lot different than the early 1900s. In Chapter 2, we talk about the government can't do it all. And that's really the point we talked about earlier, was you just can't depend on the government coming out to take care of you. Everybody thinks when there's an emergency that the firemen are going to come and save them. Well, what they don't realize is there's hundreds and hundreds of situations which need fire department and police department attention. So when they look at those calls, they're obviously triaging those incidents. What are the most serious? Where are the most people being affected? That's where they put their resources. Your little broken leg is probably not going to be number one priority when you've got a hospital downtown that's out of power. That's going to be a bigger issue for local people.
Go
ahead.
There is a middle ground, right? We should try to meet them halfway. We should try to meet the emergency responders and the government halfway.
That's the point. And right now that halfway is at least 3 days or 72 hours worth of emergency supplies. If you can take care of yourself and your family for 3 days in your home without having to call 911, that would be a tremendous help to the first responders.
Yeah, and they do an excellent job too.
They do. I mean,
I know they've been getting
It's pretty selfless. My father was in law enforcement. I've got 2 nephews on the job. I volunteered for the police departments. It's not an easy job. Nobody likes a cop. Everybody loves a fireman. But they both do the same job for you. So.
I was just gonna say that. But lately, with everything that's been going on, the cops have been getting They've been having a hard time with everything going on lately, and every time I see a cop now, I thank them because I realize that they go to work, because some cop writes you a ticket, big deal. I mean, that's the law. He's not trying to make you have a bad day. He's just they are there to help us, and I think people they lose sight of that sometimes. They think they're here to harass us. They're not. Trust me, when your life is in danger and all you have is the police to call, you're going to be glad that you even have someone to call to come help you.
Well, it's just interesting to me, but both of those professions make life and death decisions in split seconds. Do I run into the burning building or don't I? Is it safe or is it not safe? And you do the same thing with law enforcement. There's a threat that's presented to you. Do you protect your life or do err on the side of caution and not protect your life and lose your life that day. It's a very difficult decision that needs to be made in a split second, and it's extremely easy to second guess those decisions a week, 2 weeks later. But when you've got a split second to make that decision, am I going to die or am I going to live?
Yeah.
I'm glad there are people out there that are willing to make that decision. That's all I can say.
So what was it that got you into the preparedness business? For me, it was 9/11. After 9/11, that's when I really started taking all this seriously. And then after that, there was the whole Y2K thing. And then after that, there was the Mayan 2012 thing, which I didn't really take seriously. But
yeah,
there were some people who were taking out huge loans and thinking the world was going to end. But what was it for you?
Well, it was probably back to 9/11. I think 9/11 is what kind of spurred us to volunteer in a healthful way, and that's how we got involved in search and rescue activities. It just seemed fulfilling at the time. Not everybody can do that. Volunteering is difficult. You've got to be in a place in your life where you don't have small kids to manage every day. Maybe the kids have gone off to school now in college, and you've got a little bit of free time. So it's generally the 35 or 40 to 55 age bracket where people volunteer and have the time to do that. And search and rescue takes a tremendous amount of effort. There's a lot of training involved on a regular basis. And when we have animals like the horses or the people who work with dogs, train even more. Trying to keep the dogs ready. But it really was 9/11, I think, that got us wanting to volunteer and help other people. And as I said, that kind of morphed a couple years later into Get Ready Gear when we started that.
Cool. All right. So what are some more of the chapters in your book?
Well, in Chapter 3, we talk about disaster awareness. And this is really where we try to present a little more about the psychology of disasters and the different phases that people will experience through each disaster, irrespective of whether it was an airplane crash or a hurricane or tornado. They're pretty generic in terms of these phases always occur. It's important for people to understand these phases and the psychological reactions that people are going to have during a disaster. To know that, one, they're not alone, and that their particular feelings are not unusual. I know in the CERT program we spend an entire evening just talking about disaster psychology and how to prepare yourself ahead of time for some of the feelings and reactions that you may have during a disaster. So it's important for people to understand that. And then in Chapter 4, we tell people don't focus on one disaster. And this is kind of where we started out, talking about a pole shift or an EMP. Don't focus specifically on one disaster. Look at a broad spectrum of them. And as you stated earlier, your emergency preparations that you do for that broad spectrum should serve you well during any disaster. And that's really the point we're trying to make in Chapter 4.
What are some of those things, real quickly, that people can start doing? Let's say someone's listening to the show and they're not really into prepping, but they want to get into it. What are some of the first steps they can take and things that they should do?
Well, I think one of the first things you've got to do is actually start working on your emergency plan. What is it about where you live that scares you? Do you live in hurricane coastal areas? Do you live along the Red River that floods every year? Do you live in tornado-prone areas? Are you up north with a tremendous amount of snow and freezing ice and ice storms that are going to cause problems? Understand your local hazards, and that just takes a little bit of research. It's not an expensive event, that's for sure. But identify those risks that are around your particular area that you need to worry about. Now, they could be natural hazards, technological hazards, such as people coming in and terrorists, cyber terror. Would be a technological hazard. Man-made hazards, which would be terror attacks with bombs or civil disobedience, rioting, which we've had over the summer, can be man-made, and then other hazards, that are a little more far-fetched, maybe like the EMPs or collapse of the monetary system, things like that. Just to look at those across a broad spectrum and identify which ones do you realistically feel are going to threaten you, and then just jot those down on a piece of paper somewhere, and then work on your emergency escape routes. Number one, out of your home. How does everyone in your home get out of your house in the event of a fire in the middle of the night? Everybody needs to know that. Everybody in that house of responsible age, and every parent has to make that decision. Those kids need to know what to do. And if the children are too young, then the parents have to do it for them, obviously. But make sure you know how to get out of your house in the event of a fire. If you're not thinking
now, should they ever
go ahead.
Practice that? Should they ever practice the actual?
Absolutely.
How often? Like a fire drill at school, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you did it every 3 months, that'd be great. Twice a year wouldn't be bad, but again, every 3 months, depending on the focus of your family and how well people remember stuff.
Some people might think it's kind of corny, but I think kids would kind of find it fun if you made them pretend that there was a fire and we quick, we gotta run. I think they would enjoy that, actually.
It really depends on how the parents present it, but yeah, it can be a kind of a hobby activity to do preparedness. And to get the kids involved and make sure that they know 2 ways out of every room. Because if you don't think of it ahead of time, you tend to panic when it happens. And here's a great example of that, not to get off topic, but those 3 young fellows in France that just subdued the gunman on the train. One of them's here from Sacramento area. He actually stated that, those 3 guys used to talk about, hey, what if something like this happens? What would we do? And they kind of collectively said, yeah, we would jump in and tackle the guy. Well, guess what? It happened one day, and they put that plan into action, and it worked. If they wouldn't have thought ahead of time about that plan, when it happened, they might have just ducked for cover like everybody else, and it could have been a much worse situation. So thinking about emergencies before they occur is a difficult thing for people to do, but it's really critical. So if you can get your emergency plan started, that's going to be key. Understand what your local hazards are. Work on your evacuation plans. Work on a communication plan for your family. How are you going to communicate if you're separated during the day? If Dad works downtown and Mom works somewhere else, one of the kids is at a high school, another kid's over at a middle school. How are the 4 of you going to get together at the end of the day if there's been an incident in your town and you can't get back to your house? Where would you meet? How are you going to handle that? That stumped me on 9/11. I was actually in
You cover this in your book, right?
We do, yeah, we do.
Okay.
I actually was stuck in San Francisco on business and managed to get on a train heading back to Sacramento. Didn't get halfway, and the train stopped. And everybody was told to get off the train. And we sat there at the train station for hours because they didn't know if the airplane attacks was a prelude to other transportation attacks. So they stopped trains all over the country. So I sat there with no cell service trying to reach my wife for 4 or 5 hours before they actually let us back on the trains and we started moving again. We didn't have a communication plan on 9/11. We do today. And we talk about how to set those up in the book and to make sure that everybody in your family knows how to operate that plan. And again, you need to practice that plan. Like you mentioned, that's the key. And we talk about this in the final chapter under training. Emergency preparedness is not a singular event. It has singular purpose, but it is not a singular event, and it takes constant training,
dynamic
practice. Yep. And things change.
Yep.
Your family gets bigger, your family gets smaller, kids grow up, Kids grow out of clothes. Kids need more food when they get into their teen years than they did when they were 6. So you've got to, twice a year, you've always got to be looking at your emergency supplies and, hey, are they appropriate for where we are today? I mentioned if you move from
the home inventory list that you were telling me about last time we talked.
Mm-hmm.
You told me you had just completed a home inventory assessment.
We did. I spent the entire month of July doing a home inventory. And I did, basically I did one room every 2 or 3 days. So I would do like 2 rooms a week. And I used a digital camera versus a video recorder. You can do it either way. I just chose the camera and uploaded.
Now, was that for your own
that was our
list, or was that
video.
for insurance reasons?
Well, for a couple of things. One, I wanted to understand how difficult it is before I tell everybody you need to do it as well. And 2, it really is for insurance purposes. If this house gets wiped out, I have that digital file. Obviously, it's here, but it's also on a jump drive in a safe location away from my house.
Or upload it to the cloud.
Well, you can do that as well. I actually have it with a relative, since we don't have a safe deposit box, which is another option for you. The only problem with the safe deposit box is if there's a electronic issue where the banks can't operate properly, you may not even be able to get into your bank. Who knows? But we've decided to keep it with a relative in a different location, so I can actually have access to it. But it's got over 800 photographs of pretty much everything we own, every drawer in the house. Now, we didn't identify every piece of silverware in the drawer, but I can tell by looking at the drawer that I have a silverware set for 12 people. That's what I need to be able to remember. And if the insurance company only wants to give me a silverware set for 8, I can prove to them I actually have one for 12. And you could do that in every drawer in your home. It's pretty extensive. It does take time. That was labor intensive. I'll give you that much. But boy, I feel great having that document with me now, and knowing that I know where everything is.
Well, a lot of preparedness does have to do with organization. It's very important, I learned.
It does. A lot of people, when I do presentations or if I'm out in public and I'm displaying the kits that we have and the things that we put in the kits, people will inevitably come by and go, oh, I've got one of those, and I've got one of those, and I've got one of those. And then I say, well, that's great. Where are they? Well, the first aid kit's in the master bathroom, and the little pup tent, that's up in the attic with the camping gear, and the lantern, that's down in the basement, and the flashlights are in the kitchen, and there's stuff all over the house. And
I'm guilty of it too. I mean,
everybody has that good stuff all over their house. If you need to evacuate with some of that stuff, you got to put it in one pile. And that's what your go bag really is. It's a collection of that stuff.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I don't have batteries for all my flashlights and my lanterns. I need to go buy more batteries, and my first aid kit's getting very low. So this is a very good time
on a daily basis. For the kids and stuff. When an emergency comes along, it will be low on supplies.
Mm-hmm. And I know this is a great time of the year because the kids are going back to school. So you're busy buying them all their supplies and their backpack. If you're in that same frame of mind, you might as well make sure your backpack and bug-out bag is set to go. If you're doing it for the kids, why not get into the same routine and make sure your survival kit and first aid kit is up to date? Now's the perfect time to do it.
And in fact, we say when you turn the clocks back in the fall and the spring and moving forward, that's a great time twice a year to take a look at your kits and make sure that they're appropriate. If you have stuff in there that uses batteries, the batteries are fresh. And will work in an emergency. It's a perfect time. And then the difference between your winter evacuation kit, if you live in a severe winter environment, versus your spring kit could mean less clothing, less heavy duty items in there, perhaps. But it's a perfect time to take a look at them right about now. And September is National Preparedness Month, so it's a great time to, FEMA's doing a lot of messaging over social media to people about what to do. It's just a great time to get that kit tuned up, or if you don't have one, get one.
Okay. Now, what about your neighbors?
Yeah,
Should you be getting your neighbors into preparedness, try to develop a community plan?
I honestly have not, and that's probably just the nature of my personality, but I do have the capability to help my neighbors. I have enough supplies and things to assist with. Being CPR qualified, and we're in a rural environment, so we have a volunteer fire department. Having some additional training puts me in a situation where I can help my neighbors from that standpoint until first responders get here. And that's really the whole concept of middle ground prepping, is to be able to take care of you and your neighbors. But we do have a national night out. We don't do it in August like everybody else. We do it a little later in the year because it's cooler. But that's one way to kind of meet your neighbors. And actually, a lot of them, we do have a fairly active Facebook page for our neighborhood, which is how people talk about issues in the neighborhood, if there's any crimes that have occurred or strange vehicles in the neighborhood. We've also had postings of individuals who apparently are going door to door, and those will be posted on the Facebook page. So that's kind of
cool. So you're on social media too?
Well, yeah. Actually, my wife kind of monitors that side of it. I'm a little busy during the day, but we do watch. We have a Facebook page for our particular little community here that people talk to each other and go, hey, my tractor's broke. Where do I get a good tire for a tractor? And but it gives you the opportunity also to talk about security issues in the neighborhood. So it's kind of like a neighborhood watch on, but you get to do it through social media a little bit.
Do you have a Facebook page or Twitter for the middle ground prepping or the Get Ready Gear?
Get Ready Gear does have a Facebook page. We post regularly. We like to put articles on there that kind of demonstrate a lot of times how people were ill prepared for emergencies. And every now and then we'll talk about those rare instances where somebody did it right. For example,
I'm on it right now. Are these your two horses? I see your two horses. Is that you and your wife?
That is my wife and I.
Okay, cool.
But there was a lady in her early 60s, I believe, was hiking down near Yosemite around Fresno, California, a week or so ago, and got separated from her group. On her way back to camp, she actually fell down a slight embankment and wound up breaking her leg in a couple of places, I believe. Anyway, they couldn't find her for days. They had search teams out looking for her. She actually managed to crawl. She could hear water running downhill still. She spent 2 days crawling downhill, dragging herself to the water because she had a water purifier with her. So she was able to drink water. She spent 9 days out there by herself.
Wow.
She would not have survived if she would not have had that water filter with her. So that's a great story for it actually worked by being prepared.
Wow, I'd love to have her in the magazine or something, interview her. I have the what is it, the Life Straw, and then I have one from Clearly Filtered. I mean, these things, they can filter anything. I mean, you can go to Africa and drink out of like the dirtiest puddle, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then there was some girl in a plane crash. Her grandparents were killed, but she had walked a few days and survived.
I think the 8-year-old girl, a fairly young girl, walked the whole night through the forest in her stocking feet to a stranger's house. It was just the luck of the draw that she actually headed in the direction of the closest home. That was just very fortuitous of her. But great story. And we talk a little bit in the book about why people survive. A lot of it's mental attitude.
Yeah. The psychology has a lot to do with it.
Well, and again, if you think about it ahead of time, how many people get on an airplane and actually look at the emergency exit that's closest to them? even though the flight attendants point it out to you, how many actually turn around to find out where it is? Very few. Same thing in hotels. Which way in the hallway do you run to get to the stairway? Most people in a hotel couldn't tell you that. I've actually been in 2 hotels that had fires in the middle of the night and had to evacuate my room. I'm very sensitive to that.
So you've been doing this for 40-something years. Is there anything that you learned while doing research for the book that you didn't know already?
I think the biggest thing was, in terms of government preparedness, a lot of the stuff that was done kind of before I was born, programs that they used to start in. The government really tried to help people. But with classic government, it got too big. And I actually have a paragraph in there, and I list like 9 or 10 or 12 different acronyms of councils and organizations and departments that were created to help this country in an emergency and with disasters. And then it got to the point when you had a disaster, nobody knew which one of those councils, agencies, or departments was supposed to react. And they all thought that that this organization knew more about nuclear problems and this organization knew more about this kind of an issue. And I was really surprised at how much money they spent and wasted trying to figure all this out for the people, when in the early days they could have done more to help people get prepared and do messaging like that. And right now the Obama administration is actually struggling with this new concept of a nuclear explosion and the fact that they're more survivable than we thought back in the 60s. What the government's struggling with now is how to message this out to people without scaring them. That's the consternation they're having. So they're, very shortly you're going to see a national campaign talking about how to survive a nuclear explosion. And basically the mantra now is shelter in place. Stay in your house. Don't get exposed to the radioactive fallout. And the odds of you surviving are significant.
Well, the guy I had on the other night, Dave Jones, that's what he was saying. He's saying a lot of these events are survivable. People think a nuclear weapon, bam, everyone dies. But he was saying most likely it's going to be a terrorist tactical nuke in like a Ryder truck parked next to the Capitol building. And he was telling me how a bomb detonated on the ground is a lot, there'll be a lot less damage than an airburst.
Absolutely.
And as long as you're not in the immediate area, the only thing you really have to worry about, he said, is the fallout. And like you were saying before, you seal in your house and the windows, and if there's any contamination before you leave, you don't stay there. So yeah, it is survivable. And that even goes back to what you were saying about the planes. When people are in a plane, they think, well, if a plane crashes, that's it, you're dead. But even plane crashes are survivable.
Some people do, and those are the people that have thought about it ahead of time. What am I going to do? And it's probably not grab my computer bag and run out the window. But again, if you can think about it ahead of time, Vince, that just gives you so much more better decision making when the emergency occurs. Most people panic in an emergency because they've never been there before. But if you play that in your mind and think about what you would do and which way you would go and why you would go there, and maybe read some articles about that particular subject, that will help you survive that situation. And that's what we do in our CERT training. We try to teach people how to react in certain emergency situations. When you look at law enforcement and fire department, your emergency response personnel and medical personnel, they train regularly. On a weekly basis, they're doing different training activities to constantly be aware of how to react in a given situation and how to do it right. The population, on the other hand, doesn't. We don't practice fire drills every, once a week. Most people never practice a fire drill in their house. Kids do in schools. You may do it in your office building, but people never do it at home. And that's a mistake.
Can anyone sign up to become a CERT member?
Kind of. In the early days, FEMA was actually funding these through the larger operational areas around the country. So fire departments actually had budgets to teach these courses with. At this point, that FEMA funding is gone. Any of the funding now is just going to the professional responders. So a lot of the CERT programs are having trouble right now in terms of funding and getting instructors to teach them the content. If people are willing to donate their time and their energy, then you can have a CERT class in a particular area. So definitely call your local fire department to see if a CERT program is available. Here locally, we can only afford to do one a year now. At the particular department that I work with, they do not. We don't have the funding to do a couple a year like we used to. Some agencies still have the funding to be able to do a couple a year, but it depends. There are a lot of fire departments across the country that don't have CERT programs. I know some here up in the rural areas are actually taught by the sheriff's department with the help of volunteer firefighters. And those are mostly just kind of location CERT groups in a given area of the county where people want to band together and help themselves. The fire department is aware of them, but they're not actually an asset deployed by the fire department, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So if someone wants to buy Middle Ground Prepping, what do they do? They go to your website, getreadygear.com, or
well,
they go to Amazon.
The book's on the front page. There's a link there that'll actually get you over to Amazon. You can go to Amazon.com, look under ebooks, and just Google Middle Ground Prepping. Will pop right up. The book is actually free through midnight tonight. This is Saturday, September 5th. Still free all day. It will. I think it'll be $3.99 a unit come Sunday morning. But this is the end of our free promotion. But yeah, it's available on Amazon.com. The book's called Middle Ground Prepping: A Sensible Approach. And it would be a good read for a lot of people in the preparedness arena or people who want to get in the preparedness arena. It's a great starter book for a lot of folks, Vince.
Okay. And it's also in our current issue of Disaster Survival Magazine. And, hey, you want to come back on the show in a week or two and tell us how book sales are doing?
We'd love to, Vince. Love to share stories we have and talk with you more and get some of your perspectives. It'd be good.
Sounds good. Yeah, we went over our time limit, but let's definitely have you back on, and we'll talk more soon.
Great. Thanks very much, Vince.
Hey, thanks for coming on. All right, that was Jim from GetReadyGear.com, and he has a new book out, Middle Ground Prepping. Check it out.